What if we could stop heart disease before the first attack? What if the first heart attack was not the beginning of the story? What if, years before the chest pain, years before the ambulance, years before the emergency room lights, the body had already been sending quiet signals? A tiny change in the blood, a slow hardening inside the arteries, a hidden pattern in inflammation, a risk written partly in genetics, a warning that was there, but invisible to ordinary life. For most of human history, heart disease has often announced itself too late. A person can feel normal, go to work, eat dinner with family, laugh with friends, make plans for next year, and then suddenly one artery closes, one clot forms, one section of heart muscle is starved of oxygen, and a life that seemed ordinary becomes an emergency. That is the terror of heart disease. Not only that it is deadly, but that it can be silent. And that silence has shaped modern medicine for generations. We became very good at reacting. We built ambulances, emergency rooms, cardiac units, stents, bypass surgery, clot-busting drugs, defibrillators, powerful medicines that help people survive what once would have killed them. And all of that is extraordinary. But there is a harder question now. What if the greatest breakthrough in heart disease is not saving more people after the first attack? What if the real breakthrough is preventing the first attack from ever happening? Because a heart attack rarely begins on the day it happens. It often begins years earlier. Inside the walls of the arteries, cholesterol-rich plaque can slowly build. Blood pressure can push too hard against the vessels. Blood sugar can damage delicate tissues. Smoking can inflame and injure the lining of the arteries. Poor sleep, stress, obesity, and inactivity can all add pressure to the same system. Not usually in one dramatic moment, but gradually, quietly. Like rust forming inside a machine that still looks perfect from the outside. And that is what makes this idea so powerful. If disease has a hidden beginning, then maybe prevention has a hidden doorway. Imagine a future where heart disease is not treated only after damage is obvious. Imagine a world where a person in their 30s, 40s, or 50s could receive a deeper heart risk map. Not just a simple cholesterol number, not just a blood pressure reading taken once in a clinic, but a fuller picture. How many dangerous cholesterol particles are actually moving through the blood? Is there a genetic risk hiding behind normal-looking numbers? Is lipoprotein A, one of the lesser-known inherited risks, quietly raising danger? Is inflammation part of the story? Are the arteries already showing early signs of calcified plaque? Is the body drifting toward diabetes years before diagnosis? In that world, the question changes. It is no longer only, are you sick? It becomes, which direction is your biology moving? That is a completely different kind of medicine, because the first question waits for the storm. The second question watches the weather forming. Today, many people still think of heart disease as something that happens suddenly. But what if we learn to see it as a long process? A process with stages, a process with signals, a process with turning points. And if we can find those turning points early enough, then maybe the future can be changed before the crisis arrives. This is where prevention becomes more than advice. For years, people were told the basics. Eat better, move more, stop smoking, lose weight, lower blood pressure, control cholesterol, watch blood sugar. And all of that still matters. In fact, it matters enormously. But the next era may be more personal. Because two people can have the same age, the same weight, and the same cholesterol number, but very different risk. One person may have arteries that are still clean. Another may already have plaque building silently. One person may respond well to lifestyle changes alone. Another may need medication much earlier because their lifetime exposure to risk is already too high. One person may have a family history that changes everything. Another may carry a genetic cholesterol risk they never knew existed. So the future of heart prevention may not be one size fits all. It may become precision prevention, a map instead of a guess. And that map could include ordinary things made smarter. Wearables that track heart rhythm, sleep, activity, and recovery. Home blood pressure devices that show patterns over weeks instead of one rushed office visit. Blood tests that measure risk more deeply. Imaging that reveals whether plaque has already begun to form. Artificial intelligence that can look across years of data and notice danger before a human would. Not to replace the doctor, but to give the doctor a clearer view of the road ahead. Because the heart is not just an organ, it is a timeline. Every meal, every cigarette, every sleepless night, every walk, every untreated blood pressure reading, every stressful year, every inherited risk. They all become part of the story, and the body remembers. But here's the hopeful part. The body can also respond. A person's first heart attack is not always a random lightning strike. Sometimes it is the final event in a long chain, and if we can find the chain early enough, we may be able to break it. Think about what that would mean. A father never collapses in the driveway. A mother never wakes up with crushing chest pain. A grandfather never loses the independence he loved. A young worker never discovers too late that normal did not mean safe. A family never has to say, "We had no idea." A person's first heart attack is not always a random lightning strike. Sometimes it is the final event in a long chain, and if we can find the chain early enough, we may be able to break it. Think about what that would mean. A father never collapses in the driveway. A mother never wakes up with crushing chest pain. A grandfather never loses the independence he loved. A young worker never discovers too late that normal did not mean safe. A family never has to say, "We had no idea." That is the human side of prevention. It is not just numbers on a chart. It is birthdays still attended, hands still held, walks still taken, stories still told, years still lived. But there is another side too. If heart attacks could be prevented earlier, the entire healthcare system could change. Fewer emergency surgeries, fewer ICU beds filled by preventable crises, fewer people living with damaged heart muscle after surviving an attack, fewer families pushed into financial shock by a medical emergency. Medicine could shift from rescue to protection, from waiting rooms full of late-stage disease to systems that catch the drift before the fall. That is a different vision of healthcare. Not just heroic medicine at the edge of disaster, but quiet medicine years before disaster is born. And maybe that is less dramatic. There is no siren in prevention, no flashing lights, no movie scene, no last-second save. But maybe that is exactly why it matters. The greatest medical victories may be the ones no one ever sees. The heart attack that never happened, the surgery that was never needed, the funeral that never took place, the child who never had to lose a parent too soon. That is the invisible miracle of prevention, and it raises a question for the future. What if a heart checkup became less like a snapshot and more like a forecast? What if your doctor could say, "Your risk is starting to rise here. This marker is higher than it should be. Your arteries are showing early warning signs. Your family history changes the plan. We should act now while there is still time. Not panic, not fear, action. Because prevention is not about living scared. It is about living informed. It is about replacing surprise with awareness. It is about finding danger early enough that the answer is not an ambulance, but a plan. And that may be where the breakthrough truly begins. Not with one miracle pill, not with one machine, not with one test, but with a new philosophy. A heart attack should not be the first proof that someone had heart disease. By then, the warning came too late. The real goal is to move the warning earlier. Earlier into the blood, earlier into the arteries, earlier into the data, earlier into everyday life. And if we can do that, then heart disease may become less of a sudden tragedy and more of a preventable process. Something we can track, understand, interrupt, and sometimes stop. That does not mean every heart attack will disappear. Biology is complicated. People are different. Life is unpredictable. But even reducing the first attacks could change millions of lives, because every prevented heart attack is not just a medical statistic. It is a person who kept going, a family that stayed whole, a future that remained open. So maybe the question is not only, what if we could stop heart disease before the first attack? Maybe the deeper question is, What kind of world would we build if medicine stopped waiting for the heart to break before listening to it? Because the heart has always been speaking. The future may belong to the science that finally learns how to hear it early enough. And if that future arrives, heart disease may no longer begin with a crisis. It may begin with a warning and end with a life saved before anyone ever knew it was in danger.